Good morning. Come on in and get a seat. We are ready to begin. I'm Robert E. Jones. I'm the director of the center here, and I want to welcome all of you here. It's delightful to have people working together for justice, for righteousness, and the common good. And we're so thankful that you're here this morning. So on behalf of the president of United Theological Seminary, Reverend Dr. Wendy Dykeman, I want to welcome you to this place. It's a special pleasure for me, too, because I have not had an opportunity since my formative years to be with Congressman Conyers. Congressman Conyers and I were together back at Yale in New Haven, fighting for the Humphrey-Hawkins bill when it was first beginning to be initiated. And I'm so thankful. And you know, when you're in school, you're trying to find yourself. What are you going to be about? He was inspirational to me in terms of charting the path. And those of you who are here know that I'm involved in social action. Part of it is because of his responsibility when I was a student back in Yale. So I'm so thankful to be here to represent him today. With that, again, thank you for being here. And I know that this is the beginning of a great effort, and we're going to provide jobs for people who need. Amen.
For those of you who know me, you know that the one single top domestic priority is for this, the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, that the United States become a full employment sponsor of jobs for everybody in the country. And that should be our number one domestic goal. That seems simple and obvious, and what we will be doing is building up support for it and understanding for it everywhere I go in the United States. We want this country to officially go on record, and I'm working on some things to get back to the outgoing number 44, the President of the United States, to help lead and continue this legacy of the simple economic goal of jobs for everybody in America. And also with it, a trust fund for training people for jobs who may not have the skills for a job if it were presented to them. It's sad to say that our education system has disappointed so many people by leaving them unprepared for the great responsibilities of keeping a job, because that's what everything is based on. And so while Barack Obama, our president, has presided over job creation and has done a lot and gone a long way to ensure that all Americans have experienced economic recovery, we have this consideration. In addition to the millions of Americans that are unemployed, 3.5 million former workers are jobless or have, worst of all, given up searching for a job. And as a result, they're not even included in the unemployment rate, because if you're not looking for a job, you're not counted as unemployed. And I think you know what that does to a family, where there are obligations, their children, their elder people that need special assistance, and that furthermore, there are more than 6 million Americans who are forced to work part-time because they can't find a full-time job. 6 million Americans. And that's higher than at any time since the early 1990s. And so we still need over 3 million jobs to get back to reach the so-called pre-recession 2008 levels. In many urban and rural pockets of our country, including parts of my district in Detroit, the unemployment rate is still hovering at around 24 to 26% unemployment. And I don't need to remind you that people of color suffer far worse unemployment because our rate of unemployment is 9.4%, nearly double the average unemployment rate. And in Ohio, African American unemployment is 3.3 times higher than it is for whites. And so for this reason, brothers and sisters, I've introduced a number of bills that will help return America to full employment. My key measure, and I have 39 co-sponsors, my signature bill is H.R. 1000. And I was with your dynamic member of Congress, Joyce Beatty, Congresswoman Beatty, last night, and we had a wonderful event and a great discussion about this subject. What we do in the Humphrey Hawkins 21st Century Full Employment and Training Act. Why did I name it after Humphrey and Hawkins? Well, everybody knows Hubert Humphrey and his great work, but maybe everybody doesn't know that Gus Hawkins was the one that created the full employment bill, and he went to then Senator Humphrey, and he joined with him. And so I'm carrying on this great noble effort to what I consider the most important domestic piece of legislation, to create work opportunities and training programs in areas including construction, infrastructure repair, energy efficiency, education, health care, and neighborhood renovation. The bill is fully funded by a very tiny tax on speculative transactions by Wall Street, hedge funds, and traders, and will not add any cost to the federal debt whatsoever. Despite causing our economic crisis, we gave Wall Street a bailout, and the American people, the workers, never got a bailout. Billions of dollars went in to keep the people that created the bubble that finally burst. We helped, and now it's our turn and obligation to help working people and their families all across this country. So we must continue to build support for H.R. 1000 so that the richest, most powerful country in the history of governments all around the world can guarantee the right to a job or to training for a job. And so in addition to that, we want to create in the Federal Reserve a new way to create and facilitate job creation, because the Federal Reserve Board says that, look, if we support creating jobs, we'll create inflation, Congressman. Don't you understand? We've got to keep inflation down, and to do that, we don't want to say much about jobs. We want to talk about the interest rate that goes to all of the people that get all the money. And so I share the view of progressive economists, Joseph Stiglitz, for example, who say that slowing the economy to stop millions of Americans from getting jobs and pay raises would be a serious error. In the words of the greatest man I've ever known, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty nor the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists. And so, my friends, let's build a full employment society so that people all across this land can truly thrive. And full employment. And when I go back to Washington, I am going to tell people of what's happened to me in Ohio, in Dayton, and other places, with your great Congresswoman Beatty. We're going to continue to move this forward. And there will be other places that we will be going after the holidays. And we want you to know about it. And we want to come back to Dayton. This isn't just popping in and keeping going somewhere else. It's bringing everybody together for the most important domestic issue in Washington, D.C. and the Congress. A job for everybody in America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
you. And next we have Dr. Philip Harvey from Rutgers University.
My role this morning is to explain H.R. 1000, the signature job creation bill that Representative Conyers has introduced in Congress. Now, the single most important thing you need to understand in order to understand why H.R. 1000 is structured the way it is that it's predicated on the assumption that access to a decent job is a human right. And I'm going to say that again because it's very, very important if this movement is going to succeed that people begin to think of this as a human rights struggle. We need to secure the right to a decent job along with the right to health care, education, and adequate income support for people who can't support themselves. It's a full panoply of human rights, and it's our task to make sure that the United States secures them. Like other human rights, government has a duty to secure the right to work, the right to a decent job. And H.R. 1000 is designed to do that. It is designed to secure the right to a decent job in the United States. Now, how would it do that? Here the story gets a little complicated, but not too complicated, because the job creation strategy that H.R. 1000 would deploy is not the strategy that most people associate with progressive job creation initiatives. The conventional strategy that progressives have supported for the last 70 years and relied upon is one that uses government stimulus spending to promote job creation in the private sector. The strategy that H.R. 1000 relies upon is a slightly older progressive American strategy, the one developed by New Deal progressives and tested in programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration. The singular characteristic of this strategy is that it relies on direct job creation to combat unemployment rather than simply the stimulus of private sector job creation. Now, why prefer the New Deal strategy over the conventional strategy? Well, there are 6 reasons. The first is that it creates 2 to 4 times as many jobs per dollar of stimulus spending. In fact, if Congress had decided to spend the $800 billion that back in 2009 were voted on a conventional stimulus program that was predicted to and did in fact create or save 3 to 4 million jobs, if that amount of money had been devoted to an H.R. 1000 style job creation effort, it would have reduced the unemployment rate in the United States to 2% for 2 full years. And 2 years later, Congress enacted, this didn't get as much publicity, but it was a second effort that cost about $800 billion, though that was entirely in the form of tax cuts. It was after the election in 2010, and that's the only kind of stimulus that the Republicans would support. But if that $800 billion had been devoted to direct job creation, it would have kept us at that 2% level of unemployment for another 2, actually more years, because that point the economy would have begun to recover and there wouldn't have been a need for as much job creation. So the first point, H.R. 1000 has adopted a strategy that creates more jobs. Secondly, it creates those jobs more quickly. The job creation is front-loaded rather than back-loaded. You don't wait for the economy to recover to give people jobs. You give people jobs as a way to make the economy recover. Third, it distributes the jobs more fairly, because when you have a stimulus, most of the jobs get created wherever you decide to spend the stimulus. And the problem with that is that that's a very scattered and uneven distribution of the stimulus dollars, whereas H.R. 1000 spends the dollars where the unemployed people are, which means in every community in the country where there are unemployed people, that's where the money gets spent in proportion to the amount of unemployment that exists in those communities. Fifth, it's a strategy, fourth, no, that was just 3. Fourth, it provides better protection against unemployment during a recession. In fact, one of the things you need to understand about recessions is that it's not really necessary for people to suffer unemployment during a recession any more than it is necessary for people to go hungry during a recession. We don't let them go hungry. Well, people need food. We do what's necessary to provide them with food until the economy recovers so they can provide it for themselves. Same thing with jobs. Yes, the economy is going to experience recessions, but we can provide jobs for people so that they have something to live on equivalent to what they had before the recession started until the economy recovers. This was really the point of departure for the New Deal strategy. It wasn't really intended so much to get the economy out of the Great Depression. It was designed to help people survive the Great Depression. And that's one of the functions that H.R. 1000 would perform. Sixth, or fifth, it's a strategy that can be implemented at the local level as well as at the national level, and this is very important for the eventual success of this strategy. We know that H.R. 1000 is not going to be passed in this Congress, but there are places in the country where progressives have enough political power that they may be able to implement the strategy on the local level. And by building experience with and demonstrated success in the use of this strategy to combat unemployment, we think that the road to eventually passage of the bill in Congress would be paved. And sixth and finally, and this in my view is actually the most important of the advantages of the H.R. 1000 strategy, and that is that it is in fact capable of achieving genuine full employment which is not something that the conventional strategy is able to achieve. Indeed, economists have a special term that they use to describe the lowest rate of unemployment that it's possible to achieve using a strategy of job creation that relies entirely on economic growth, which is the conventional strategy that we are accustomed to. And they refer to that as the NAIRU. It's an acronym for a term that you'd never remember, and I'm not going to inflict upon you. But the consensus among progressive economists today is that the NAIRU is about 4%. That's the lowest level of unemployment we can actually shoot for with conventional policies. Now, the problem with 4% unemployment is that it isn't even close to full employment. The last time the United States had that level of unemployment was 15 years ago in December 2000, when the unemployment rate was actually below 4%. It was 3.9%. The economy was booming, and there were 4.9 million job openings in the country. And that sounds pretty good until you compare it to the 5.6 million unemployed workers who were looking for jobs that month, the additional 3.2 million involuntary part-time workers, people who had part-time jobs but wanted full-time jobs, and the 4.2 million people who wanted a job but were not counted as unemployed because they weren't looking in the ways that are required for you to obtain that designation in government statistics. And so at a time when employers were trying to fill 4.9 million jobs, we had 13.1 million people who needed and wanted jobs. Now imagine a game of musical chairs. There are 13 players in the game, but only 5 chairs. What do we need to do in order to make sure that everybody is a chair? It's simple. We've got to get 8 more chairs. And the same is true of the labor market. Back in 2000, even though the unemployment rate was 3.9%, even though we could not use economic growth to drive it further down without causing inflation, that didn't mean we had to be satisfied with that gap in employment, with that job shortage. And the singular characteristic of H.R. 1000 is it's designed to get us past that point. Now, how many jobs would H.R. 1000 create? Well, actually, 1/3 of the money collected under H.R. 1000 would be devoted to job training. 2/3 would be devoted to job creation. The job training, though, would be job training in which the trainees received stipends, so it's paid job training. The amount of money that would be available for it is 10 times as much as we currently have available for job training. And perhaps most important of all, if you talk to people who run job training programs, we could guarantee a job for every successful graduate using the skills they obtained in the training program, because that's where the other 2/3 of the H.R. 1000 money comes in creating the jobs necessary to make sure that the opportunities that we need to give people not just the motive, but the experience of success going through a job creation, a job training program, to then move into a job using what they've been trained to do. Now, would H.R. 1000 create enough jobs to actually close the economy's job gap entirely? And the answer to that is not immediately. It would create about 6 million jobs and training slots, and whenever the economy's level of unemployment was above the NAIRU level, that 4% inflation barrier, it would create another 2 million jobs through its stimulus effect, but that still only totals 8 million. And I just told you, well, actually I didn't, but today the job gap that's equivalent to the 8.1 million job gap that I said existed in 2000, today the job gap is larger. It's 13.9 million. So H.R. 1000 would immediately create 8 million jobs, but we need 13.9. However, it is designed in a way that over time it would actually achieve genuine full employment. It would actually provide jobs for all those job wanters in the economy. Now, the reason that H.R. 1000 over time would have that effect of reducing the number of jobs we had to create in order to achieve full employment is something else that I'm not going to try to explain to you today because there's not time, and quite frankly, the explanation might bore you also. So you're just going to, well, don't take my word for it. If you're interested, please talk to me about it, because I like nothing better than to explain the economics of H.R. 1000. But it is designed to get us to genuine full employment. I think that my best guess would be that it would probably take a decade or so for us to get there, but once we got there, it would keep us at genuine full employment, jobs for all, no job gap at all. It would keep us there, and would keep us there notwithstanding the fact that the economy would still experience recession. Since, as I said, we would go through recessions when the economy dipped, but we wouldn't have the unemployment because H.R. 1000 would step in to provide the jobs that the recession destroyed until the economy fully recovered. But even when it fully recovers, we still need it to create all those jobs beyond 4% unemployment needed to get us down to genuine full employment, which is probably 1 to 2%. Okay? Now, where would the money come from? I'm not going to address that because Representative Conyers has already described roughly the tax that would generate the funds. As I've indicated, a third of that money would go for job training. 2/3 of it would go for job creation. Who would create the jobs? Well, the jobs would be created essentially by you all, because the design of H.R. 1000 is to use the money to provide funding for not-for-profit organizations, educational institutions, Indian tribes, state and local governments, other public sector agencies that develop project plans and submit those plans for approval to the Department of Labor, which would be the distributor of the funds. They would then get the funds to actually create the jobs. So if you are in an organization that prioritizes housing, create a project to build houses. If it prioritizes green energy, create a project to put solar panels on everybody's house, free. If your priority is education, create a project to give every teacher 1 or 2 teacher's aides, if it would help, and fill the other unfilled positions in schools. Whatever the focus of your particular interests are, H.R. 1000 is a route to achieve your goals.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey.